Flying's extremely exciting. It's fast, glamorous and convenient. But, and it's a very big but, jet lag can make your holiday or your business trip miserable. You can't sleep when everybody else is. You're irritable and generally well below par. But fortunately, scientists have just begun to unravel the cause of jet lag. So where does it leave all those traditional jet lag remedies? Because at the moment, everyone seems to have their own favourite. Like ignoring alcohol on a long flight. Or taking sleeping pills to transfer body rhythms to the new time, when day suddenly becomes night. Some people believe the only way is to fast when they fly, while others eat vast quantities of these. Can't think why. Because bananas, like all the other remedies, seem to have nothing to do with the substance scientists have just linked with jet lag. It's a hormone called melatonin, produced in the brain by the pineal gland, which for years was thought to be just an evolutionary relic. Like the appendix, it didn't have a role. But now we know that during daylight hours, the pineal gland receives messages from the eyes telling it it's daytime, and the gland remains dormant. But at night, it begins to produce melatonin, which passes via the bloodstream to other parts of the brain. And that nightly cycle of melatonin production seems to be the major factor in keeping our body rhythms ticking over. But how does it produce jet lag? Well, you only suffer from it when you fly east or west, because you don't pass through time zones if you go north or south. And it's passing time zones that confuses the pineal gland's daily pattern. For example, if you're flying from London to San Francisco, the flight takes 11 hours, but you could be in continuous daylight for up to 22 hours, far longer than your body expects. Your pineal gland just can't adjust immediately, so your nightly dose of melatonin arrives in daylight. Your body rhythms are disturbed. And flying back to London is even worse, because then the darkness appears before your body expects it, and your melatonin is made too late to correspond to your new period of darkness. As it can take 11 days for your melatonin production to adjust to the new time pattern, the scientists want to help us by getting pills made that contain the hormone. These could be taken a few days before a long flight to prepare our bodies in advance. Trials are about to begin, so there's a lot of work to be done yet before jet lag is just a bad memory.
Inside this safe is probably the world's most valuable trade contract. It was made between the Dutch East India Company and a local Maharaja in 1691. And just to prove that the spirit of it would never die, it was confidently engraved in solid gold.
But the majority of archives here at the India Office Library in London are paper ones, records and Oriental literature covering 7 miles of shelving, a priceless collection going back to around 1200 AD.
To the artist who created it, this book would represent the work of a lifetime. All the intricate illuminations in gouache and gold leaf were, of course, done by hand. Unfortunately, ordinary paper records like this were never designed to last as long as that gold treaty, and some of them were of consuming interest to certain members of the local population. The ants and lice. Rare though this book is, it's beyond repair.
Other culprits are the pigments themselves. Most vulnerable are the greens, copper acetate, which has oxidized to form acids, and in places they've burnt right through the paper, particularly on the borders.
Repairs of sorts had been carried out for some time, but what was needed was an invisible mend.
After all, pictures as priceless as these can't just be patched up with sticky tape. Patience and skill are required for repair. And at last there's a technique that promises fast, high-quality results. It's a combination of old and new, a modern acrylic adhesive and a traditional Japanese gampi tissue that on its own has long been used in conservation. But here it's being separated from a backing paper, which has been coated with the new acrylic adhesive. Because the tissue has been in contact, a precise amount of adhesive has been transferred to the tissue. Right now, the tissue is hardly invisible. But though it's only 3/4 of a millimetre thick, it is immensely strong. Conservation begins by neutralising that acid in the pigment. And when the solvent has evaporated, the Gampi can be laid on top. Because of the strength of the tissue, all that's needed are small bridges across the gaps in the original, which is now protected under a sheet of cellophane. Though the operation is skillful, this is a comparatively speedy job, cutting a precise framework of reinforcements. When it's completed, it looks rather like a window frame. At this point, the protective cellophane is removed, and it's now that the adhesive can be activated. When a special hot iron is applied, that layer of adhesive, 1/10,000th of an inch thick, turns liquid. Some flows down into the old paper, but the rest of the adhesive is drawn up to fill the open fibrous structure of the Gampi tissue. The old and new papers are now fused as one. And because of the molecular composition of the acrylic, the thin tissue goes completely transparent. The adhesive doesn't penetrate the pigment, so the colours remain bright and undamaged for future generations to admire.
It could be a carelessly discarded cigarette, it could be faulty wiring. How easy it is to start a serious fire. Warehouses and shops are especially at risk because of all the paper and cardboard they use in packaging. Home Office figures just published show that in 1981, some 2,000 fires directly involved combustible paper and cardboard packaging. The damage runs into millions of pounds.
So here's a substitute for cardboard. It's just as effective, just as light, only this stuff won't burn. And for once on this programme, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. Here's £500 in real money. I'm going to put it into this box made out of the new material and pop the box into an oven, which would make ordinary cardboard ignite in seconds. In fact, the oven we've got is so hot that by the time this demonstration is over, it'll melt down this aluminium saucepan. Let's just pop it in. Struth, that's hot. Now for the money. How hot is this oven, you might ask? Well, right behind me is the readout, 765 degrees centigrade. OK, well, that's cooking. Let's just have a look at what the manufacturers have used to make this stuff. Now, the clever bit is not so much that all the materials are non-flammable. In fact, it's largely mineral wool. That's a sort of candy floss made of crushed rocks, with a smattering of various other chemicals. No asbestos, by the way, and all of that mixed up in water. Now, the clever bit is how they've managed to bind all this together to make it look like paper, but behave much more effectively. Have a look at this model. It represents the staple ingredient of ordinary paper. It's a strip of cellulose fibre coated with hydrogen atoms, these black teeth. Now, because hydrogen atoms have a natural attraction for each other, these fibres lock together to form a structure. Unfortunately, hydrogen atoms don't stick to mineral fibres, which is the main ingredient of the new paper. So what the manufacturers have done is to coat the mineral fibres with an organic chemical, which acts a bit like flypaper. The hydrogen atoms stick to that, and as they do, they attract other hydrogen atoms, just like ordinary paper. Now, another real value of this stuff is that it can be processed just like ordinary paper, which means, of course, that factories churning out ordinary paper and cardboard can be used to make the new stuff without new plant or machines. Well, here's the finished product, and you can see that this is clearly resisting the flame, what flame there is, though it is just about glowing red hot. But how's that going to protect our £500? Well, the box our money is in is made out of 2 sheets of cardboard, separated by a corrugated piece of cardboard to form an insulating barrier of air. Well, all right, with nothing at stake, you might have expected that demonstration to work. But let's have a look now to find out if the genius who thought up this demonstration still has a job at the end of the programme. OK. I don't know if you can see that, but the handle of that saucepan has wilted away completely. Incidentally, the BBC was understandably reluctant to give us £500 of licence payers' money to do this demo, so the manufacturer of the new cardboard bravely stumped up his own money. Let's see if he's got anything left. Oh, look at that, hey? Look at that. No problem. £500.
If you've ever tried holding a conversation while listening to a portable cassette player going full blast in your ears, then no doubt you'll be told not to shout. But the fact is that unless you can hear yourself speak, it's very difficult to judge the level at which you're speaking. Now, you may not think that that's particularly important, but spare a thought for the 100,000 or so severely deaf people who cannot judge the level at which they're talking. But now, this little gadget could possibly help them with that. It's a device fitted to the back of this watch. Now, if I talk normally, nothing much is happening. But if I speak loudly, this light-emitting diode here is lighting up and flashing in time with my voice. Now, this wire here leads to a small microphone and a circuit which I've preset to react only when I'm shouting above a certain level. But you won't have to watch the light all the time, because at the back here is a small vibrator, which, when I shout, produces a tingling sensation on my wrist. Now, it works just like a conventional loudspeaker. Inside here is a minute electromagnetic coil, which is making this little plate here vibrate up and down to the sound of my voice, but only when it's speaking loudly. Now, since those vibrations are far too small to be visible, we can see the principle working here on a full-sized one. So, when I speak quite normally into this microphone, nothing much happens. But if I begin to speak louder, the cone beneath suddenly starts to oscillate quite violently. Well, it'll obviously be less socially embarrassing for the deaf people if they can judge and control the level of their voices. But this device is perhaps even more helpful than that, for when they're alone. With a bit of practice, they'll be able to recognise the different rhythms which sounds produce. The vibrations produced by that sound, for instance, are obviously on a totally different pattern from this. Take a bone. And by getting acquainted with the feel of different sounds around the home, deaf people will be able to respond to things that they've previously been totally unaware of. So, for instance, they won't miss any important callers.
The charmers of Grange Hill, with, of course, stink bombs this time. Most of us have suffered their horrible bad egg smell, but perhaps without realising that the culprit, hydrogen sulfide, can be dangerous in high concentrations. In fact, the size of stink bombs was regulated recently to reduce their danger. But that sort of control isn't so easy in the main areas where hydrogen sulfide is a problem. Wherever oil or natural gas is found, there's a possibility of hydrogen sulfide. Drilling sites are said to be either sweet or sour. They're sour if hydrogen sulfide is found. And the fact that sour wells can be dangerous was proved in the mid-70s, when over 20 people were killed by hydrogen sulfide fumes in Texas and Wyoming alone. And that hydrogen sulfide danger spreads from the well as it travels with the oil or gas through miles of pipeline. Pipeline that becomes pitted and corroded by hydrogen sulfide in a complex chemical reaction. The pipeline, which could, of course, be piping natural gas to our homes, then leaks. But at least the one thing hydrogen sulfide has in its favour is that it's so smelly there shouldn't be any problem detecting leaking pipes. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. Hydrogen sulfide may stink, but only at low concentrations. Increase its intensity and it knocks out your ability to smell because it actually anaesthetises nerves inside your nose, and it can eventually paralyse your breathing with fatal results. Obviously, you need a reliable way of monitoring hydrogen sulfide, and several methods have been used. But this latest development here is now being field tested, and it uses microprocessors to monitor hydrogen sulfide specifically, even inside pipelines. It's ironically based on the most old-fashioned of school chemistry. It's the test where you put paper soaked in lead acetate into the gas, and I'm going to make the gas from this stink bomb. Let's put it in there, put the top on first because it really is awful. Now that paper will change colour to black if the gas is there, so let's do it. There we are, beautiful black colour. Proof indeed. Now here, the gas is being tested, fed through this pipe here, and it's going onto tape just there, impregnated with lead acetate. If it contains hydrogen sulfide, it darkens the paper, so there's sensitive equipment in this area for getting consistent readings. Now, if I shade it, you'll see a small beam of light pulsing onto the tape. Using a photocell in here, the amount of light reflected back is measured. Now, this is the sort of result you get. As the tape darkens, if hydrogen sulfide is there, less light is reflected. And that optical quality is analysed by a microprocessor inside, and it's converted into a reading. That reading is the concentration of hydrogen sulfide in the gas. Whenever that gets too high, an alarm goes off, warning people to chemically purify the sour gas and, if necessary, to evacuate, a development that would be particularly valuable now that some North Sea sites, once thought to be safely sweet, are turning sour.
Real and yet unreal, a fantasy world of space and depth. Holograms, three-dimensional images of three-dimensional objects, all created within 2 dimensions. But in a Brighton hospital, this fascinating science of illusion has now found a role in medicine.
To be able to get 3D images in a hospital like this is, of course, of obvious interest. If you want to use radiation treatment to, say, destroy a brain tumour, then you need to know its exact position and its precise volume, or you're in serious danger of destroying the surrounding healthy tissues. But there's one big snag. The only images you can work from are 2-dimensional X-ray photographs. This stereoscope goes some way towards meeting the problem. It uses 2 X-rays taken from slightly different angles. And that deceives the eye into believing that there's a 3rd dimension. But some people find it difficult to focus a stereoscope. And anyway, it can't be a precise 3-dimensional picture. And that, of course, is exactly what a hologram is. But how do you make a hologram out of something as complicated and hidden as a brain tumour? For a start, we have to go back to X-rays.
Now hold very still, Mrs. Rose. Very still.
This is a body scanner, a large moving X-ray machine that can take pictures slice by slice through any part of the patient's anatomy. The picture it's taking now is of a skull, and the white patch at the top is the tumour inside the brain. Each scan can then be photographed, each photograph representing a single section through the brain. Those photos can then be combined on a holographic camera. As with any hologram, the laser light is split. So half this incoming beam is reflected back
and the other half travels on. The first beam passes down here, is reflected off a mirror onto the back of the holographic film. Simultaneously, the other beam passes up here, is also reflected off a mirror, and then comes through two lenses, which spread the beam onto the object being copied. In this case, our slide from the body scanner. The beam then passes through a condenser, through a ground glass screen, and onto the front of the holographic film. When this beam passes through a light area on the slide and meets the beam coming the other way, they're still at the same wavelength, so no image is formed. But when it passes through a dark area, its wavelength is changed. So then when it meets the constant beam coming from behind, an interference wave pattern is set up and an image is formed on the holographic film. But I've got to remember that I'm not copying an object that's already three-dimensional. All I've got to work with is a series of two-dimensional slides. So somehow I've got to build in depth to the finished product. And that's done very ingeniously by moving the ground glass screen each time a slide is exposed. The distance I move it is carefully calculated so that each exposure will build up the depth accurately and create a precise third dimension on the hologram. So, change the slide, move the screen, and expose. On to the next slide. Move the screen again, and expose, and so on, until I've built up a composite image of all the slides onto one piece of film. Develop the film, and instead of all those scan pictures, we have this. But look at it under a spotlight. Depending on how I look at it, I can get inside the hologram. I can measure the length, the breadth, and for the first time, the depth. In fact, this is an exact scale replica of our cranium, clearly showing the precise location of the tumour.
This is a story about a versatile little trailer. Now, frankly, we wouldn't be showing you this just because of its sleek, aerodynamic look, or the fact that it seems to be able to hold enough gear for a lifetime of weekends. No, the reason we're showing you this is because it's rather more. It isn't just a functional common or garden trailer. It's a boat as well. There you go. And what makes it special is that you can put it together in minutes. A steel pin simply holds the two halves of the hull together once you get it in, and because these two bits come up well above the waterline, it stays perfectly watertight.
Within 10 minutes, the seat is on, the sail is up, and you're ready to go. And we're ready to go. So, until next week, good night.